Money is a cage. It imprisons both the human body and the mind. Understanding the mechanics of this cage helps us distinguish between reason and illusion. Yet, even when we understand it, we can never escape the endless trade-offs. That passage opens the spirit of a rare book that dares to look directly at the most uncomfortable truths about money. Popadowski's book, The Uncomfortable Truth About Money, is not like the promising get-rich-quick manuals. Unlike the optimistic, high-energy speeches, this work exposes the deep paradox that even when one possesses a lot of money, anxiety does not disappear. It only changes shape, revealing that money is both a means to our freedom and a burden that forces us to bow our heads. The book starts from personal memories, a young boy witnessing his mother fade away due to illness, growing up in scarcity in Brooklyn, and later experiencing the volatile world of investment, where billions of dollars can evaporate in a single trading session. Every story portrays the fragility of money. What seems solid today can vanish tomorrow. It is not the key to a stable paradise but a slippery surface where everyone must learn how to keep their balance. What makes this book special is the way it forces the reader to face the truth that stability is an illusion. We want to believe that a steady job, a solid savings account, and a stable investment portfolio will protect us. But financial crises, global pandemics, inflation, and political shifts all show that every certainty is just a mask. The only thing one can control is the ability to think independently and remain calm in the face of chaos. So, how can we truly live with money? Can we transform anxiety into a form of understanding, so that instead of panicking, we observe and learn to adapt? And is there a path to escape the vortex of comparison? Those with little money feel ashamed, those with a lot of money live in fear of loss. These are the questions the book does not answer with formulas, but with a journey, from debt to pricing, from office politics to the shocks of the global market. Each part is like a mirror, reflecting the limits and illusions that we all carry. Listening to this book, you will not find promises of getting rich quickly. Instead, you will find the honesty that money is an uncertain game where intelligence is sometimes not enough, luck is sometimes too late, and mistakes are certain. But within that uncertainty, we can still build frameworks and anchors to help us not collapse before the volatility. So, what is more valuable? A desire for permanent stability, or a mind that dares to accept chaos to find the meaning of freedom? Before diving into the book review, we encourage listeners to purchase and read the book to fully grasp its content. Only when you read this entire book will you understand the issues you are hearing me recount. Buy the book and support the author. And now, let us begin the review. Money is a cage. It confines us, forcing us to manage our lives within it. That realization does not come from a theory in textbooks, but from fragments of memory tied to life and death. In my childhood, I watched my mother wither away like a rotting pear, soft from the inside. Cancer gnawed at her little by little. In the midst of that chaos, I learned to create order, I learned to boil eggs, to climb mountains, and to take care of myself when I had children. I understood one more thing: creating order also means knowing how to live with money. Before that, I despised those who were too focused on money, thinking they were narrow-minded and lacked imagination. But one afternoon in 1997, standing on a Brooklyn sidewalk, holding the hand of my 3-year-old son while fat rats scurried through the trash, I knew I was wrong. I did not want to raise my child in a place where rats lived as boldly as the landlord. To escape that, I needed money, and I didn't have it. That was the starting point of a long journey. I realized that money is not everything, but it is unavoidable. It is cash today and also money for the distant tomorrow, when we grow old, if we are lucky enough to reach that age. Money is dollars, but it can also be euros or yen, it changes depending on the country. It is used to buy food and medicine in times of crisis, and also things we don't truly need but want to have. It is a dry number, but also a feeling of anxiety and desire. Every person is locked in the cage of money. It binds the body and the mind. Understanding the operating mechanism of this cage helps us distinguish between logic and emotion, and from there, learn to stay calm and reduce mistakes. But money never gives us a fixed answer, it only brings endless trade-offs. Talking about money makes most people feel awkward. people are willing to brag about where they studied, or even send naked photos to strangers on the internet, but if asked how much money they have, no one wants to answer. Everyone is insecure. With little money, one feels inferior. With a lot of money, one fears jealousy or being asked for favors. Even the rich feel poor when compared to those who are richer. I was once a low-level reporter writing about the cotton market with a salary of $38,000 a year in New York. While I was struggling, the traders in the cotton pit understood a language I was completely clueless about. They said briefly, "Prices up because of the storm." It took me time to understand what they meant. Decades later, I became a partner at the world's largest hedge fund, trading everything from cotton and gold to stocks, bonds, and real estate. I had more money, but the worry about money was still there. On the outside, others saw me as a boring middle-aged man, going to work, eating dinner, occasionally appearing at parent-teacher meetings. But inside, I always knew money was just a tool. What mattered more were the vibrations of life, the moments. When holding my mother's hand before she passed, when smelling the salt water in the marshes of Massachusetts, when reading a perfect poem in a quiet cafe, those seconds had nothing to do with money, yet money was the silent chain binding us. It forced us to pay for the apartment, the bills, the medical expenses. The rich and famous often lose their way because they lose that chain. They think they have escaped reality, but no, money is like death, which no one can avoid, and like sex, talking about it is always awkward. My father was embarrassed to teach me about sex but never talked about money. I am the same with my own children. Perhaps it is because I myself did not understand it either. This book is the conversation about money that I never had with my children. I learned to look straight. Money is not as stable as health or life. One day you are healthy, the next you fall ill, today you are employed, tomorrow you may be unemployed, the market is calm, but in an instant, it can collapse. Germany was once a powerful nation, then suddenly fell into the hands of a madman, creating hell. That can happen anywhere. The massive stone columns of banks or the formal suits of experts are just masks covering the truth. The monetary system is inherently unstable and fragile. Whoever wants to survive must learn to observe, study, and find the patterns. Like walking in an avalanche zone, one must understand why the snow might collapse, learning physics, history, psychology, and the low probability but devastating disasters. I once met a central bank governor who could explain inflation in detail but was confused when talking about long-term interest rates or stocks. Even those running the system only understand a part of it. Understanding only a part leads to big mistakes, so we need to fill the gaps. We need a thinking framework. One of the basic examples is inflation. Money loses value over time. To understand inflation, one must understand how prices are formed and how supply and demand factors change. If not, we will be swept away, like the Germans during the Weimar era, the Americans in the 1970s, or those after the COVID pandemic. The truth is, money does not care about us. It has no feelings, it does not guarantee safety, we must adapt to it, not the other way around. And the first step is to separate what we can control, our own minds, from what we cannot, the chaos of the world. Money never brings stability. That is a common illusion, a persistent desire in the human mind. We want money to be a shield against the winds, but in truth, it never guarantees that. The world is always shaking, jobs change, crises follow one another, and even our bodies are not durable. The only thing we can control is our own minds. The uncertainty of money is tied to scars from childhood. I lost my mother too early, and that loss planted a constant insecurity in me. On the contrary, my father, a rigorous scientist who participated in the Manhattan Project, lived with a steady scientific spirit. He didn't know much about finance but taught me the lesson of seeing things through and not being wasteful. The good fortune of having a father and the misfortune of losing a mother, those two opposite experiences shaped how I look at chaos and order. My life partner grew up in the Soviet Union with an alcoholic, abusive father, in a society plagued by constant scarcity. She carries a frank pragmatism, the more money, the better, but don't waste it on meaningless things. When we became parents, it was natural to try to pass on the spirit of studying, working hard, and saving. But it is not easy. Children carry their own wounds from the past, the programming errors that life has sown. We adopted a girl who had been abandoned since birth, that left an imprint on how she perceives safety. My son also has a different way of learning, similar to the dyslexia that once haunted me. Everyone's starting point is random and different. Some are born in scarcity, others are wrapped in abundance. All of that shapes how we view money. If born at the bottom of society, we only know about what is missing. At the top, we are used to excess. But that normality we perceive is an illusion. In reality, it is just luck. How to escape those fractures? Through training the mind, getting enough sleep, eating moderately, exercising, meditation, therapy, or even religion. All of that helps us see clearly that the chaos in our heads is just fleeting thoughts, not reality. But to achieve that calmness, it takes time and discipline. Some people seem to be programmed to be calm in the face of chaos. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, or Julian Robertson, the founder of the fund I once worked for, might belong to that group. I remember my father with his coldness, like someone with undiagnosed Asperger's, rarely influenced by emotions but sharp in analysis. That type of mind is very suitable for money. Conversely, most of us are people who go up and down with our emotions. I am the same. Constant anxiety makes the mind spin. The only way is to learn to observe, to identify when you fall into a state of panic, and to separate the logical from the emotional. Only when we are calm can we see the chaos outside clearly, the financial crises, the technological volatility. Because the economic world operates on the foundation of creative destruction. Joseph Schumpeter described this nearly a century ago. Old things are erased so new things can be born. Horse-drawn carriages were replaced by cars, gas-powered cars are slowly giving way to electric vehicles, Uber appeared, and traditional taxis faltered. If we are on the winning side, we see it as natural order. If we are on the losing side, we feel the injustice but cannot resist. Societies that try to resist, like the Soviet Union or North Korea, all fall into decay and oppression. Creative destruction never stops. I saw it as a child delivering the Washington Post in the morning, a newspaper once powerful enough to force a US president to resign. Yet, only a few decades later, the internet drained its advertising revenue, and that print empire fell into a free fall, eventually being bought by Jeff Bezos. Inside that destruction are intense crises. I lived through the 1998 Asian crisis, the 2000 dot-com bubble, the 2008 credit crisis, and the global pandemic, all while history was being rewritten. Those events are now just a few lines of text, but in the moments they happened, they were nightmares. Savings evaporated in an instant, tens of thousands of dollars lost in a few days. That instability is the pain of every individual. Ray Dalio, whom I once worked with, was always haunted by his father's memories of the Great Depression. He believed that such crises would repeat because of the nature of debt. Debt is spending today but a burden to be repaid tomorrow. When debt balloons and explodes, and then the time comes to tighten, the economy plummets. The structure of the system is inherently unstable like that. George Soros explains it with the concept of reflexivity. Asset prices rise, people get excited, spend more, creating a self-reinforcing loop. Crowd psychology and prices constantly interact, making the system permanently unstable. Looking back, there is a very useful concept, volatility. It is the speed of change. Short-term bonds are less volatile, stocks can drop 30% in a year. But volatility is not just in the market, it is in our lives, job loss, illness, personal crises. Volatility is something that cannot be avoided. And that is why the first step on the journey with money is learning how to stay calm. We cannot stop the storm, but we can train ourselves in the habit of observing and responding. The anxiety does not disappear, but the recognition that I am anxious is already a big difference. Only from that calmness can we continue to build strategies for income, savings, and the future. And the next step in the story is income. Income is the heartbeat of financial life. It is not just a number on a payslip but a profound contract, trading a portion of freedom to regain survival. Work is that exchange. We sell time, energy, and skills in exchange for money. But inside that, there is also adventure, memory, and unexpected experiences. I have held countless jobs, delivering goods by bicycle, cleaning, carpentry, mountain guide, teaching, pouring beer behind a bar, then becoming a reporter. Finally, stepping into banks and investment funds. Each job opened up a separate life fragment. There were times when my salary was so low that my wife and I had to sleep on the kitchen floor to give the only room to our son. There were times when I sat in brightly lit halls where figures like Clinton or Gorbachev were present. Income not only buys survival, it buys unrepeatable memories. To understand income, four questions must be answered: how much is needed? What can you do? What is the scale? And how to adapt? First, how much is needed? That number must not be estimated but must be specific. I have kept a spending spreadsheet for decades, like body weight. No one likes to step on the scale, but if you don't know where you are. Each month I record every expense, then look at the average to cut out the excesses. When income is zero, I need to know how long I can last. The savings portion creates breathing room. Actual needs are always less than we think. My grandfather was a living example. A former soldier who lived through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the 1970s inflation. He lived a life of radical minimalism, eating whole grains, drinking tea, exercising by walking and push-ups, reading books borrowed from the library, no house, no warm winter clothes. In the cold season, he would drive to Mexico. He taught me the difference between the essential and the frivolous. Wealth starts by realizing we need less than we think. Next, what can you do? Schools often only teach us things we are bad at, they rarely point out what we are good at. But in the global labor market, only when you know your special ability can you compete. Degrees are important passports. My father had a PhD in biology and spent his life researching at the National Institutes of Health. He was paid to pursue his passion for discovering muscle fibers. But my grandfather had no degree. He spent his whole life struggling with manual labor, never finding his own specialty. I stood between those two paths. When I was studying medicine, I quickly realized I wasn't suited for it. Lack of focus and dyslexia were barriers. I switched to history, struggled with long essays, but at least I could breathe. Later, I combined history, journalism, language, culture, economy, and the market into a profession, explaining the world to help others invest. How we earn money depends on connecting seemingly disconnected pieces into a valuable picture. Then, the scale. There are jobs that require few people, so the salary is high, like a neurosurgeon. There are jobs that create products that can be replicated globally, like software engineering. Both bring outstanding income. But most other professions don't have that scale. A classical musician spends a lifetime practicing, but the number of seats in an orchestra doesn't increase. Conversely, a composer for movies can attract millions of viewers. Scale is the divider between making ends meet and being wealthy. I once witnessed a distant relative, Rob, choose a different path. While everyone around me worked for the government in Washington, he borrowed money to open a stock account, turning $100,000 into $1 million in one night in New York. He took my brother and me out among the towering skyscrapers into a noisy beer bar. I realized no one forces us to always be short of money. We can choose another path. And finally, change. All income lies on a melting iceberg. The Washington Post was once powerful, now it belongs to Jeff Bezos. The bank where I worked was bought and sold many times, even the once swollen hedge fund eventually shrunk. Income can increase, but only if we jump to another iceberg before it sinks. The secret does not lie in keeping one source, but in the ability to switch in time. We are living in an era where technology, from electric vehicles to AI, changes daily work. Jobs once thought stable, librarian, cashier, even trainee lawyer, can disappear. Even asset values are overturned when the climate changes, floods submerge lands that were once safe. Income is the first door on the journey with money, but it is not static. It is a flow, and we must know how to steer. When you clearly understand what is needed, what you can do, how to scale, and how to prepare for change, you truly gain power in the exchange between freedom and money. And to understand it better, we need to go further, where everything converges: prices, the invisible measure of every transaction. The salary we receive is the market value assigned to our skills. The bills we pay are the values of the things we consume. And the assets we own, from stocks to apartments, are the value today of the cash flow tomorrow, throughout our lives. We bargain with these numbers, and to understand money, we must understand them. Prices are both an accurate measurement at a point in time and a prediction of the future. A stock is bought and sold at today's price because people believe it will be profitable tomorrow. How much is a doctor paid? How much does a plumber charge? All of that is the meeting between supply and demand, between basic needs and distant expectations. The outward appearance that humans set for prices hides its natural essence. Like water always flowing by gravity, demand is an instinct that cannot be extinguished. Whether under a dictatorship or a democracy, humans still must eat, drink, have a place to live, and be treated for illnesses. When the COVID pandemic exploded, a thermometer could jump in price to $1,000. The state could set price caps, but the black market would appear. Supply and demand eventually always win. Technology makes prices change even more violently. I remember the first time I was in Moscow in 1990, wanting to send word to my father that I had arrived safely. I had to queue at the post office, write a few words on a piece of paper, and pay per character. Today, a text message from the airport is free for the same need. But the price is almost zero. Similarly, photos once needed film and development, now, just a touch on the phone. Prices change when technology redefines limits. Facing that flow, we must decide where we want to stand: near the center, where the cash flow is churning, traded for intense pressure, or on the outer edge, where it is calm but the flow is weak. A neurosurgeon can earn $1 million but lives under constant pressure. A gardener earns much less, but the rhythm of life is peaceful. There is no job that is both high-paying and leisurely. In consumption, the difference lies in what we choose to buy. My grandfather taught me to eat little, choose simple, and cut out the excess. A person with high income but who lives frugally can accumulate wealth. Conversely, a person with a moderate income who chases average spending will forever stay in place. Wealth is not just about earning a lot, but also about paying less than the crowd. In investment, the problem is more complex. The price of an asset reflects both the present and the prediction of the future. Buying something of quality that is currently undervalued is ideal but rare. And the future is inherently uncertain. Even so, trying to understand the forces of push and pull on prices is still necessary. The wise principle: buy at the lower end of the distribution and sell at the higher end. A brain surgeon shops at a budget supermarket. A software engineer walks instead of buying a luxury golf cart. Conversely, someone who is already exhausted in a moderately paying job burns extra money on luxury items. That is the formula that leads to absolute poverty. But the story of pricing does not just stop at the individual, it is a social issue. No one has ever found a way to value labor that everyone finds fair. Blue-collar workers look up at the high-income class and see injustice. Those above think they deserve it because of their studies, efforts, and acceptance of pressure. Human history is full of imbalances. Russia before 1917, Germany before 1933, China before 1949. Both flaws in wealth distribution and prosperity concentrated in the hands of the few easily make society explode. Politics, therefore, cannot be separated from pricing. The state decides tax rates, businesses decide bonuses, unions bargain with management. Taxes, to me, are an obvious truth that must be paid and must be calculated when planning in the US. Holding stocks for more than a year helps reduce taxes, while short-term trading eats away nearly half the profit. Even interest from bonds and dividends from stocks are taxed differently. To understand money, one must understand the rules of the tax game. Prices also reveal one thing: who suffers so that others can breathe easily. When I was still poor, my friends accused me of selling my soul when I moved from journalism to banking. But standing in front of the rats crawling in the apartment, I had no reason to maintain that romantic spirit. I chose stability for my family. And then, as my income increased, I also gradually slipped away from the rigorous frugality that once kept me grounded. What was once luxury suddenly became necessary, the cage of money. And so, it closed one more circle. I still remember being at a gas station after inflating the tires for my old Honda, a wrecked car sitting in the corner of the garage, stained with blood. The driver had died in an accident. I turned to look at my two little ones sitting in the car, and that very day I went online to find the safest car. The answer, an Audi, costing double what I could afford. But how could I look away? Prices are not just numbers, they are the measure of safety. Sometimes it is life itself, from the thermometers with inflated prices during the pandemic to the car we choose for our family. Prices are the transmission channel for every decision, and when you understand them, you begin to understand money. But that is only part of it. Because beyond prices, there is social class, the lines built by money. Money does not just price every item or every hour of labor, it also draws invisible walls, dividing humans into classes. At every level, people look across the wall, both craving and anxious. The poor look up at the rich and see injustice. The rich look down at those below and feel the fear of being robbed, being hated, being dragged down. I grew up in scarcity. When I looked at friends who had enough new clothes, who had spacious houses, I immediately understood what that invisible boundary was. When I matured and stepped into brightly lit rooms, meeting national leaders, I understood another side. Abundance doesn't bring peace of mind, either. It only changes the form of anxiety. The rich are also obsessed with their own fears, the fear of seeing their assets evaporate, the fear that their children will not measure up to the children of others, and the fear of being left behind in an endless race. Money builds systems of soft class distinctions, the modern caste system. These are not written into law, but everyone senses that the path to a prestigious private school opens up its own exclusive opportunities. While children from poor neighborhoods are left with underfunded public schools, the person in a suit in a high-rise office feels fundamentally different from the person in a uniform working a shift in a factory. Every small detail, where one lives, how one dresses, the type of car one drives, becomes a marker of class identity. Yet, the irony is that regardless of which class you are in, money still binds you. The poor may feel guilty for not being able to provide for their families, the rich may feel guilty for receiving more than they believe they deserve. That psychological burden gnaws at the mind just as surely as hunger gnaws at the body. When moving away from the past and looking toward the future, one realizes that money is not the ultimate destination. It is merely a vehicle, and like any vehicle, if you do not know how to steer, it will lead you to places you never intended to go. Many people spend their entire lives chasing that extra zero in their bank account, thinking that once they reach a certain number, they will finally be free. But the cage of money has no door that you can simply unlock once you are rich enough. Instead, the cage expands, and your desires expand with it. You start needing a bigger house, a more exclusive club, and more complex financial instruments to protect what you have. The true freedom that money can buy is not the freedom to consume more, but the freedom to say no, the freedom to choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, and what values you uphold, regardless of what the market dictates. If you have understood the mechanics of this cage, the illusion of stability, the reality of price, the weight of class, and the flow of income, you have already taken the first step toward true autonomy. You stop being a slave to the numbers and start being the architect of your own life. Life is not a balance sheet. It is not an asset class. It is a sequence of experiences, connections, and moments of awareness. When you look at your life through the lens of money, everything becomes a transaction. When you look at it through the lens of experience and human connection, everything becomes an opportunity. The book does not end with a definitive solution because there is none. Life itself is a series of trade-offs. Each logical argument, each example, and each paradox presented leads us to a simple realization: when we question money, we are actually questioning life, the limits of safety, and our longing for freedom. If any idea in this book has made you pause and reflect, the effort to write it has not been in vain. I hope you will share your own thoughts. Do these frameworks help you see money differently? Do they shed light on your upcoming decisions? Every comment and review is not just feedback, but a continuation of the dialogue, an opportunity to dig deeper into things that seem familiar but whose meanings are never truly exhausted. Furthermore, I want to invite you to join in expanding this journey. Please suggest books you would like to hear next, texts that make you curious, and ideas you find necessary for the present. Your choices will decide the direction of our next conversations, where we will explore other cages beyond money, perhaps the cages of power, belief, or our own deep-seated desires.